So Kodee Furst, she is with Annie Capital. And Kodee is on a mission to change the face of entrepreneurship. As a co-founder and the managing partner of Annie Capital, she leads the firm's efforts in investing in the power of women entrepreneurs through funding, education, and community development. With years of experience consulting women-led organizations, she spent the majority of her career overseeing business development and has led growth activities across the United States. She currently serves on the board for the Innovation Technology Fund in North Dakota and is the chair of the board of the North Dakota Center of Technology and Business and is the founding partner of North Dakota's Women Entrepreneurship Week. And many of you may have heard she spoke yesterday at the innovation or the expo yesterday. So with that, let's give it up for Kodee Furst.
Well, good morning, Rapid City. This is much more my crowd than behind the speaker podium yesterday. So appreciate all of you choosing to spend your Wednesday morning here. I do want to give a shout out to the organizing committee because it's hard work to put 1 million cups on every single week. It's hard to find speakers. It's hard to commit to the space. It's hard to make sure you have people that actually show up. But from an investor lens, we actually look at whether or not a community has 1 million cups and decide if that's where we're going to spend time. So the work that you're doing does matter. So thank you so much for the invitation to come down. As Melanie mentioned, I shared a lot of this yesterday at the Innovation Expo. So for those of you that were there, apologize for the duplicate spiel, but what I'm most looking forward to is the Q&A. So please note down any questions that I can help answer. As the introduction kind of shared, I have the privilege of serving as the co-founder and managing partner of Annie Capital. We are a company that invests in the power of women. So we started a little over a year ago. The main reason that prompted us to start is that we looked at data kind of nationally that was telling a pretty appalling story about the way funding was being distributed to female founders. Specifically, there was some data points that shared that there are more men named John running Fortune 500 companies than all women CEOs combined, which is really disheartening. So we felt like, how could we change that? And probably the easiest way was to look in our backyard. So we do invest in women through the most obvious choice, which is funding, but we also do that through education, a little bit of advocacy, and then predominantly on community development. So similar to what you see at 1 Million Cups, connections matter to entrepreneurs, and sometimes they need someone who just helps connect those dots for them. And so we get to be a part of that story. I just want to give a high level on our investment thesis and what we look at from a preference standpoint. Number one, and I think probably every investment company says this, but they look at the team. We truly mean that in the sense that we're looking at majority women owned and led. So the woman has to be actively involved in the decision making of the company. The number one reason we niched as hard as we did on women is that we actually think it's a safer bet. So our whole job is to try to de-risk our portfolio. And we know that women are more capital efficient. They're also more realistic about their forecast. So when I get pitched by a female founder, I never see a hockey stick. That will never happen for a projection for a female founder. And so we believe it's an important component to the founding team. The second part is that we're really focused on North Dakota and South Dakota. I live in Dickinson, which is in Western North Dakota. And when we were looking at what mattered to us, we cared a lot more about making business work in our backyard than doing it on a international or global scale. And so I have two partners, and the three of us all grew up in very small towns in North Dakota. We all have ranching roots. Our parents like to remind us that that's where we all learned how to have some grit and to do what needed to be done, regardless of how long the day had gotten. I think it also really instilled in all of us, if you're a South Dakota native or have been here for a long time, the value of community and the value of helping each other out. And when we think about successful businesses, those are the qualities that are really important to us. So instead of having to try to train that somewhere, we just decided to do business where it's a huge part of just who we are. The third thing we look at is a high growth potential. So this is essentially what people want to know is what sector we invest in. We're sector agnostic because our sector is women in North Dakota and South Dakota, but we do look at high growth. So that means that we're most interested in business models that can scale and can serve a really big customer base. And so that doesn't take away from lifestyle businesses or for companies that may just have one location that are serving audiences just right in their neighborhood. Those are still really good businesses, but they may not be investable for us. So the high growth potential is really critical to when we do our diligence. We also look at early stage. So if you're familiar with funding, there's kind of multiple different stages that people invest in. One is seed. So that's kind of where you have an idea and you get the money to help the idea get tested. We typically come in right after that. So we're usually not going to fund your beta test. So if you still need to prove that your concept works, that's usually a little bit too early for us. But we do want to partner early on to help you navigate the hard stuff that is entrepreneurship in those early ages or those early years. Those of you that are entrepreneurs in the room probably can remember some of the most significant decisions you made in the first 3 years of your business that have either made a big difference in a good way or a big difference in a bad way to the current state of your business. And we know that those early stages, what entrepreneurs need more than anything is someone who can pick up the phone and hear them when they're concerned about making payroll or getting the next deal negotiated or wondering why in the heck they're giving up all their time and energy for this thing called business, right? So we do want to partner fairly early. And then lastly, we look at barriers to entry. And that's essentially just competitiveness, especially if you're a first-time entrepreneur. We want to make sure that someone bigger and more experienced isn't going to be able to come in and do your product faster because it does take some time to learn the lessons. So once we figured out what we wanted to invest in, then we had to figure out how we were going to do it. None of us grew up to be investors. That was never on like our what do you want to be when you're an adult plan, right? And so the whole world of investing has been trial and learning by fire. But I think what we know is we understand women and we also understand entrepreneurs. So from a fund standpoint, we always say we're a fund designed for women by women and for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. So that led us to revenue-based financing. Those of you that are familiar with funding, you probably know that there's debt financing where you go to the bank and get a loan. There's equity financing, which is you give up part of your company ownership to get some money in and you're focused on kind of a big exit. So for us, we wanted to do what made the most sense from a common sense standpoint, which is revenue-based. So it essentially allows us to put money into your company to help you grow, but we're not taking ownership. So a couple key features is that it's flexible. That means that you pay us back on a monthly basis, but you pay us back based on your sales. So if you, again, own your own company, you know that and this is we always laugh about this with entrepreneurs that talk to us about funding, is that they come with their pro forma, but it's like all made up guess, right? Like how do you know what you're going to be doing in 8 months on a unit economic standpoint? And so for us, it was really important to say, let's make sure that we're getting paid back, but we're not cash strapping you in the process that you're going to have to go take out more credit to get out. That doesn't make any sense. So flexibility was really important. Non-diluted was really important. So that just means that we don't take an ownership stake. And I think what's critical about that is most women that I know start their companies because they're trying to solve a problem, not because they want to grow a company and sell it. So non-diluted means that our success is not based on you selling your company someday, which is called an exit. Instead, our success is focused on profitability and growth and real numbers. So we'll partner with you for as long as it takes to get us paid back. And then you can do whatever you want to with your company and we'll just cheer you on as you keep going. And then lastly, it's really about the blue sky. So I think we're really lucky to live in a place where you probably all know a banker and have a personal relationship with them. We have a really friendly banking community across both states. But they can only do so much when it comes to companies that don't have a building or collateral or assets. And so we really exist to help fill in a gap in the capital landscape, which is on those ideas that might not be traditionally fundable by the banking community. So to wrap up, I think a couple of things that we've learned in the last year has been women are just like all entrepreneurs in the sense that they need connection, they need support, and they need education. So while we invest from the funding standpoint, we also have the privilege to be a part of a lot of education and a lot of community development, which is where we're seeing kind of the biggest impact on our deal flow, which is been a surprise and definitely a lesson learned. So I appreciate the time and looking forward to Q&A. Yeah, go ahead.
And the Fruto, excuse me, the vice mechanics and the Fruto architecture. As a former educator, I'm curious about that side of what you do. What kind of format are you offering?
For education?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think when we first launched, that's one of the things that we very much underestimated was just the amount of education that was being put out around how to scale your business, like how to negotiate, how to work on sales, and then how funding can help you. So Kaufman actually puts out a ton of research on funding in the capital landscape, and recently just released a report that 83% of entrepreneurs don't ever get venture capital, so outside funding, or banking. So that's a large group of entrepreneurs that are bootstrapping their way through this. And I think part of the reason why we're comfortable with bootstrapping is that we're concerned about giving up control. We don't want to feel stupid. And so we kind of stay a little bit small. So once we figured out that that was a gap, we looked at education we do some webinars where people can just jump on wherever. Most women founders that I know are managing like 1,000 hats. And so trying to meet them where they are, which is they've got an hour over lunch in between a bunch of other commitments, has been a big help to us. Later this month in Fargo, we're doing a growth summit for female founders that's all focused on that kind of skill development. And then obviously speak at a lot of events. Thank you for the question. Yes.
All right, I'm extremely curious. What's the story behind the name?
Okay, well, we were trying to come up with how we a previous business we've done, we were not clear about the name. So we wanted to be explicit that it was a capital company. And then looking at the female nod, I was reading a story about Annie Oakley, and there is a line in her biography that says the secret to her success was that everyone underestimated her. And when I think about female founders, it's like, yeah, that's your story. And so we did the nod to the Wild West, which is entrepreneurship, but also just her secret sauce.
I knew there had to be something. Paul Engel with that black, by the way. Sorry.
Thank you. Mitch.
Hi, I'm Mitch Nightingale with Ascent Innovation. Kodee, so you talked about the struggles of female founders, and then culturally here in the Dakotas and the Midwest, we're not a risk-taking society. Entrepreneurship is almost kind of shunned in some ways, other than the agriculture industry. Kind of larger scope. I imagine you have a lot of struggles just in general. Can you talk about? I know you're trying to educate, but talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Mitch and I met at a conference randomly. We sat at the same table. It was an international conference, and found out that we were both from Western Dakotas. And we're like, wow, we shouldn't have to go to an international conference to meet each other. But Mitch just asked about some of the struggles in helping with the pipeline and how do we overcome the risk aversion and just kind of the culture. I think part of it is just creating awareness to it. So nationally in the United States, entrepreneurship is at a 40-year low, which is frightening. Because as we think about innovation, entrepreneurship is what drives innovation. So entrepreneurship is responsible for the net job creation in the country, responsible for how we innovate as an economy. And so I think this isn't just a North Dakota, South Dakota issue. I think this is a national issue. So I think where we can come in is one, probably the most reoccurring theme I've heard in the last year is that you can't be what you can't see. And so being really intentional about giving women a platform who are building something disruptive and innovative, putting them on a stage or connecting them to some media to get some press or get on the radio or whatever the case is, to just start slowly showing that you can do this. I think some of it is also looking at how do we de-risk entrepreneurship? And that's actually, I had the privilege to go to DC a couple weeks ago and sit in a listening session. There was 22 of us from across the country that flew in to share some of the challenges of women's entrepreneurship. And the conversation was actually hosted by the Center for American Entrepreneurship and Kauffman. And listening in that piece, there's certain things that it's, as a woman, it's our natural instinct to protect our family, right? So if you're at that point in your life, it's really hard to say, hey, put your house on the line, potentially not be able to feed your kids, and go after your dream, right? That's like so counterintuitive to biology. And so I think some of the work that's coming out of that is going to be some really good federal and state policy recommendations on what can we do just to make this safer, so that those ideas aren't just sitting on a shelf and can actually get to market. But I don't have an easy answer. It just, we didn't expect when we started this that we would sit at the center of behavior change. And those of you that work in any sort of therapy know that it takes a long time to see that change. So, we see wins when there's equal representation at events. We see wins when, a woman feels like she's able to say out loud that she's a founder of a company. And so just that identity work, which just takes time. Good question. Yes.
Deanna, Becket, your coach, raised in North Dakota, now in South Dakota.
Yay.
Annie Capital is a funding organization. How is Annie Capital funded?
So typically you have limited partners on funds, which are people who commit money to the fund. And I was lucky enough, I worked for 2 people for a long time in business development, and this was our just next venture. So that money comes from success from other entities, and this is where we're focused on from a business development standpoint.
Jack Stitch with JSA Productions. How does a female entrepreneur or any entrepreneur start to attract investors?
Yeah, well, really good ideas will always find capital. So if you are, working on something really cool that has big potential, capital will find you. But I think specifically it's just starting a relationship. So, reaching out and saying, this is what I'm working on. I know I'm too early for you, but I want to be on your radar. Can we have coffee so that, you know what I'm up to and what that looks like. But I think, and it totally depends on the fund. And this is what's really frustrating about investment is that there's not a one size fits all answer to that. But what we look at is your growth mindset. So, what is your goal? Like, are you wanting to get to a place where you've got customers in every single state and you've got employees and you're looking at, multi-million-dollar revenue? Where is your mindset at on what your end goal is? But also, how big is your market? Because that's important for that scale part for us. But I think, showing up to things like this, being a part of the Innovation Expo, just starting the conversation. Investing is a relationship, so just like anything else.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Leah, Braun, Nsight Partners. I'm also from North Dakota.
Yay!
Who do you interface with that complements what you do, such as the Small Business Administration? They have programs over there as well. Not lending, but do you do any kind of cross with them?
Yeah, so just like any startup, we're figuring it out, right? And so we're also entrepreneurs navigating all this, but one of our early on strategies was to partner with the people who are doing the work. So those of you familiar with entrepreneurship, there's the whole concept is called an ecosystem. So who are the people who are really involved in the ecosystem? And that's different in every city. So it just depends on if I'm in Fargo versus Sioux Falls versus Bismarck versus here, who are the people that have referrals essentially from a deal flow standpoint and from an educational partner. I think one of the things that we were surprised to figure out was, and it's so obvious that we should have known it from the beginning, but I shared this yesterday. A friend of mine said to me once that our network looks like us, and that's a tough pill to swallow. And so I think when we look at some of the more traditional resource partners, a lot of them are men. And so when we were looking at referrals, they didn't have many women entrepreneurs in their network because that's just the reality of network effects. And so we actually partner a lot more now with companies that have nothing to do with entrepreneurship, but have women in high growth potential type roles because their network typically is really similar. So we've really changed how we work networking, which has been pretty successful. So, but people like Mitch, his version in other cities are great partners in the sense that they have a pulse on what's happening locally and can say, here's someone we think you should talk to. And then our approach is to do like an early 15, 20-minute phone call just to hear what you're working on. And we try to get to know really quickly so that we're not wasting someone's time.
Hannah Kelly with Cultivating. I'd love to hear either a story or an example of a really successful venture you guys had, or if not, maybe a sector you'd love to get into or why.
Yeah, so I think one of the opportunities that we're in the middle of right now is an example of proving that entrepreneurship isn't a 20-year-old working out of their garage. She's far down her career. She's got a PhD. She works in healthcare. She's very, very talented. But I think what is powerful about her story is that what she's working on is going to impact rural. So not only are we investing in her, but her product is going to help make all of our lives a little bit easier. And so when I think about what matters to us as a company, it's how do we, make living here the best it possibly can. And so those products that are impacting that is really cool. But I think what's also powerful about her is that she's got a 10-year plan and she is working the plan, and there will be very little that stops her because she's figuring it out. And so that's one of the coolest parts about this work is that we get the privilege of being a part of someone's story in a small way or a big way, who are just phenomenal powerhouse women that are like, I'm doing it, and you can tell me no 1,000 times and I'll figure it out regardless. And so that part of the work never gets old to hear that.
So I have a question. Melanie Torno with Torno Mediation and Health Services. So you're an entrepreneur helping other entrepreneurs. So can you share a little bit about some bumps in the road that you may have experienced in this entrepreneurial journey that you are on, and how you overcame those?
Yeah, so talking about some of the bumps, I think imposter syndrome is really, really real. And I had heard that a lot of times before in my career that, people, not just women, but would say, I have no business being in this, and someone's going to figure out that I'm making all this up, right? And I didn't personally experience that until I was in a couple of meetings and I was the only woman, and you're going, what am I doing at this table? Right? And so I think the imposter syndrome piece has been a personal thing to overcome and to think about. So that's definitely number one. I think two is, just like every entrepreneur, what we thought was going to happen didn't happen. And so now we're on plan Z to try to see how we continue to make this better and what does it mean for our mission to work, but also make money. And so I think that's been, every entrepreneur worries about how you're going to make the money, and that's something that we certainly do as well. And I don't know if I don't think I expected something to demystifying that I'd have to do. No, we're not funded by government. No, we are not a philanthropy. No, this is not something that we're just doing because we feel sorry for women. Like, no, we're actually doing this because it's an intentional strategy for an investment. And so I don't think we expected some of the messaging that maybe we'd have to work through, which has been interesting. Yeah.
Kind of going off that imposter, Constantine shares name from the U.S. Bank here. So with that imposter fear that you're alluding to, and sitting at that table and wondering, do you belong? It's like, I think that's a very normal feel for a lot of people in general, let alone entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs, but they absolutely do belong at that table. So what have you found in your life, or how can we empower each other to believe, so make sure that person believes that they do have a voice and a reason to be at that table, and like, you want to kind of let them know that it's there. Have you anything from a reading or something that you found that has helped change that mindset into a very positive place?
Yeah, I think like broadly speaking, and again, this is I think for all entrepreneurs, but especially women entrepreneurs. Sometimes they just need an invitation. So we've seen some of the most effective work in changing who shows up at events by me putting in some time on the front end saying, you need to come to this. Like, this applies to you, right? Language is a big deal. Like, women don't typically identify as a female founder or as a woman entrepreneur. They're just a business owner doing their thing. And so we try to be really intentional about that. And trying to validate that you started this company, so you are all of those things. But then I think personally, and we tell other people this too, but you gotta have a really good inner circle. And so whether that's family or partner or friends, like I'm really lucky that my husband constantly is like, if it's not you, who's gonna figure this out, right? Like you'll figure it out. So I think having someone who just constantly is like, whether it's an epic failure or a huge success, doesn't change who you are, which I think is what we all struggle with. And so trying to kind of get rid of the fear of failure a little bit on like, what's the worst that could happen? And if anyone's going to knock someone for trying, most likely that person has never tried entrepreneurship, in my experience. The loudest critics, like the people with, anyone can be a critic with 2 thumbs and a phone at this point. But the loudest critics, if you look, they've typically never been in the arena. Like, they've never done it. They never have risked something. So I think putting that in perspective on like, who's really yelling at you and doesn't matter, right? And trying to just make that a little bit more human. But I do think that entrepreneurs across sectors, across ages, sometimes just to be like thanked for taking the road less traveled and saying like, good for you, you make Rapid City a great place to live. I love your coffee, so I'm going to go buy it and actually spend my money where I say it matters, right? All of you are invested in entrepreneurship, and so would imagine that this group is constantly supporting entrepreneurs, but it's amazing that sometimes we don't think about that. We hit everyone up for a donation, but we forget to actually go to the local place to eat, shop, and drink. So I think just putting your money where your mouth is really important too.
So Kodee, what does an engagement look like with you? Someone getting started, how does that work?
Yeah, so either you get my card or you reach out on LinkedIn or go through our website and do an email. And then typically we set up an initial call. We try to do them on video, but it just depends on what's going on. So just a quick, tell me about you. What are you working on? Here's who we are. Highly recommend to read our website. Those investment preferences are by no means an all or nothing, but they're pretty clear about what matters to us. And it, again, doesn't take anything away from other businesses. It's just, this is what we're focused on. So reading through some of the stuff that we do helps to just be prepared for the call. And then from there, if it is something that we're interested in, we'll follow up and try to ask you to do a pitch deck. So I think one of the things that's different about investors compared to a bank is I'll never read a business plan. I care about getting to know you and what is your kind of big idea. So we do that through a pitch deck typically. And then if that clears, then we're going to ask for a whole bunch of information about your financials. And that kind of kicks into our due diligence. And if those show up right, then usually there's a partner meeting, and then we go into the final diligence phases. But we outline our timeline and everything on our website so people know, and try to demystify diligence as much as possible, because if you've never done it, it seems really scary, but it's not. It's just getting information about you and your company. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
One of the founders of Black Key. I know that you mentioned that your company, or your organization is young, but do you have, like, how many clients do you have, like, partnerships do you currently have that's in your group? And have any fallen off?
Yeah, so we've only been open for a year. So as far as a graduation, that would be an enormously fast timeline to get the payback done. We don't talk about the size of our portfolio very often because most women are still pretty private about whether or not they've taken funding. But as far as like how many female founders we've talked to, I would guess nearly 200 at this point. And do that through everything from a listening session to a one-on-one to an engagement. I know for Women's Entrepreneurship Week, we've got like 17 events going on for the week, and there's 20 office hours already signed up, and we've got 30 speakers coming to that Growth Summit that are all women leaders, and so they're all out there. We just have to give them a stage.
So another follow-up question.
Yeah.
How is your organization measuring success and growth?
How is
At
our
this point,
organization?
or how is it evolving?
Yeah, how is our organization measuring success or growth? I think it's constantly evolving. So, obviously the number one reason is how many deals are we doing? That's a big part of investing. That's how we make money. But also it's really looking at some of the intangibles on, one of the biggest wins that I think we've experienced is the first event that I ever went to as Annie Capital was a founders event, and I was the only woman there. It was in a big market, and so I told the guy organizing it, like, where are all the women? He's like, I don't know, we invite, and I don't know, right? And 8 months later, that same event happened, and we had 50-50 representation because I went and said to every one of them, you need to come to this event, right? So those are like super small wins that are never going to show up on a balance sheet, but matter in identification and matter in community and matter that a woman feels like she matters. So I think that's some success piece. We definitely feel success in just, is there a voice at the table? And it doesn't have to be us, but are we thinking about, it is different for underestimated entrepreneurs to do this. And so is someone thinking about not scheduling the event at pickup time for daycare, right? It's like, is someone thinking about being really clear about what the goal of the event is, because women care more than anything about ROI on their time. So how are we explicit about what's happening? So I think some of it is just being a voice, and that's hard to have a KPI that measures that, but just being intentional about how we show up.
Where are do you accept bare bones, like first day, and how many years into the business, or is it a gamut of everything?
So we kind of look early is really where we're mostly focused on. But like I said, to fund an idea is pretty tough. So, if it's a researcher that has IP that has huge potential, but it needs an FDA study, that's really hard for private capital to get behind that, unless you're a med tech, biotech investment company. So like that's an example of where the concept has to be a little bit proven before we'll come to the table. Or like if you're working on a tech product but you have no MVP, like you've got a sketched out wireframe but you don't actually know what your minimum viable product is going to look like, that's too early for us. So we want to make sure like you've got customers that aren't your family and friends, like people are buying from you. And it doesn't have to be thousands, but it has to be more than 10, right? And that you're looking at where you go next and how we can help with the growth is kind of what we view our sweet spot as.
I guess maybe follow up to that, do you focus on service or products or a variety of everything?
Yeah, so the question was, what sector do we focus on? And because we're high growth, that's like the scale is really important to us. That eliminates some sectors, so it's kind of tough to do anything that's really asset heavy. Part of what we feel a real commitment to is being honest with women about what's the best choice for you. So if you're looking to finance a building, right now the interest rates are so low that you should be talking to a commercial banker, right? You should be taking advantage of opportunity zones. You should be looking at tax incentives, not looking at private funding. So, you know, like a boutique is something we would not fund because it's just not scalable to the size that we want to go to. But as far as other things, you know, we'll look at just about anything, just making sure it just depends on that pathway to market and the entrepreneur. For female founders. So, you know, there's a lot of people that will tell you that a business is never going to work. We need more cheerleaders. We need more people saying, go do it and think about it, and here's someone you should meet, and here's a coffee that I'll buy you, and yes, it's okay to say that you're scared, and that's all entrepreneurs. That's not gender specific. I think, you know, to Mitch's point, in our region, we're sometimes so scared of risk, but if we don't have risk takers, we don't have new things, and so to cheerlead as much as possible, I think, is something we all can do every day.
Right, well, let's give it up for Kodee.